I knew exactly what to do when someone showed too much interest. I'd scowl, cross my arms, and respond with short, firm sentences. It wasn't arrogance, it was defense. I learned early, and in the hardest way, that nothing destroys you like the illusion of being loved by someone who never intended to stay. I watched my mother waste away waiting for a man who left with small suitcases and big promises. And I swore to myself I'd never put myself in that position. I grew up learning not to depend, not to trust, not to yield. And maybe deep down, I no longer even knew what it would be like to let someone truly get close. So when he appeared, calm, kind, without the forced enthusiasm of those who want to conquer quickly, my first instinct was to reject him. Not with shouts or harsh words, but with the rehearsed silence of someone who prefers to push away before it hurts. I was cold, I was ironic, and I confess, even unfair. Not because he deserved it, but because I thought it was safer to scare him off than to be caught off guard. The problem was, he didn't get scared. He came back. Even after a conversation, cut short, even after I disappeared for days without responding, he came back. He didn't demand, didn't pressure, he just came back. That threw me off balance, because dealing with contempt or rejection was easy. I knew those. But quiet, affection, steadfastness without demands, presence without noise, that was new. And for someone like me, new was always more terrifying than any loneliness. He kept coming back, without announcement, without expectations, without drama. He just came back. Sometimes it was just his presence on the other side of the cafe, looking at his cup with that absurd patience that unsettled me more than any passionate speech. Other times, I'd receive short, kind messages that didn't ask for a reply, just left the uncomfortable feeling that someone still cared, even when I went out of my way to seem indifferent. I tested his limits, like someone who's seen every rope snap, and the less he took offense, the crueler I became, not to him but to myself, because every time he returned, with that same calm demeanor and a kind of serene strength in his eyes, I felt something that terrified me. He was willing to see who I was beneath it all, beneath the toughness, the coldness, the irony, and I didn't know if I could handle that. I knew myself too well to believe anyone would stay. I knew where it hurt, where I withered, where I broke. I knew it wasn't easy to live with my long silences, my habit of pulling away when I most needed comfort, the walls I built every time something seemed too good. And because I knew all this, I preempted abandonment. It was always safer to leave first than to be left. Easier to hurt before being hurt. More comfortable to be the strong, unshakable woman than to admit that sometimes I desperately wanted someone to just say, "Stay. I'm not going anywhere." But he never said that with words. He said it with actions, with silent waiting, with the way he respected my time, even when I barely knew what to do with it. And that's what broke me down most. He didn't want to change me. He didn't want to fix me. He just wanted to be there. And ironically, that's when the fear became unbearable. Because when someone decides to love the parts of you that you're ashamed to show, the ground you thought was solid starts to shake. Every piece of armor you spent years polishing starts to weigh you down. Every escape begins to feel like cowardice. And every absence starts to scream that maybe, just maybe, you're killing love before it can even be born. Not out of malice, but out of habit, and I had become an expert at pushing away those who wanted to stay. I tried to push him away in all the subtle ways I'd learned over the years. I didn't block him, I didn't yell, but I started to fade away slowly like someone who no longer wants to be found. I stopped replying to messages, declined invitations, made up cold, convincing excuses. The last time I saw him on the street, I forced a hurried smile, mumbled something about being busy, my head full, and went on my way as if nothing inside me was crumbling. And that's when I waited. I waited for the absence. I waited for him to disappear too. For him to realize, like everyone else, that my company wasn't worth the effort, that I wasn't someone easy to love or even to stay for. But he didn't disappear. Not in the way I knew. He stepped back with grace, like someone who respects the other's space. But he didn't vanish. He sent weightless messages like, "The coffee was bitter today. I thought of you." Once, he left a note at the cafe counter that read, "I'm not here to fix you. I just like knowing you're okay." That note stayed in my bag for days. I read it, reread it, folded it again, and hid it at the bottom, as if it were evidence of something I couldn't name, and it was in that respectful silence that I began to hear things the noise of my self-protection had always drowned out. I started to realize he didn't need to be there every day to remain, that he didn't need to insist to touch me, and that love, maybe, wasn't this hurricane that destroys everything, but a subtle presence that reaches you when you've already given up on being reached. Something inside me began to crack. Not from pain. This time it was different. It was as if the armor, old and rusted, started to loosen its pieces on its own, from exhaustion, from wear, or maybe because, deep down, I no longer wanted to fight someone who only wanted to stay. And it was in that silent beginning of surrender, in that moment when I realized he was still there, even when everything in me said, "Go away," that I understood. The problem was never him. The problem was that I didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't leave. The truth is, I still tried to keep my distance. The old AnnaBeth, the one trained to flee before being caught, still had sharp reflexes. But something in me was no longer the same. He didn't pressure me, didn't demand answers, didn't ask for explanations. And maybe that's what moved me most. It was as if he knew me in layers I didn't even have the courage to visit. With every discreet gesture, every lingering, respectful look, he created tiny cracks in the walls I'd built over years, not with force, but with time, with care, with consistency. It was like water hitting the same spot on a rock. It makes no noise, but one day it shapes it. I started to notice his absence when he wasn't there. Strange to say, I know. But there was a calm he left in the air, even when he left, a gentleness that seemed contrary to the world and to the chaos that lived in me. Sometimes I caught myself hoping to see his name among my messages, even after telling myself I wanted no more contact. Other times, I looked at the chair beside my table and imagined him there, with his serene demeanor, listening more than speaking. I realized he already inhabited my inner spaces, even without ever truly crossing my threshold, and it was there, in the midst of this silent war between what I said and what I felt, that I realized real love doesn't force its way in. It waits. It understands. It sits on the doorstep of your soul and stays there, quietly, until you're ready to unlock the door. And he was doing that, every day, without asking for anything in return. And I was starting to wish, even if quietly, that he wouldn't. Tired of waiting. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days when the body moves, but the soul lags behind. I woke up with that familiar weight in my chest, the one that told me everything was too much, that I was failing, that it would be easier to disappear than to keep trying to be whole. It was one of those mornings when even brushing my teeth felt like it demanded too much strength. I didn't respond to anyone. I deleted notifications. I buried my face in the pillow and let the world exist out there, while inside me everything collapsed in silence. I didn't cry prettily. I cried ugly, with short sobs and my throat tearing from the inside. And it was there, on the cold floor of my room where pride and pain lay side by side, that his name came to my mind. I didn't want him to see me like this. I'd always been good at seeming strong, too strong, really, so strong that no one noticed when I was broken. But he already knew. Even when I pretended, even when I gave a crooked smile and said everything was fine, he saw what no one else did. And that day, without me saying a single word, he showed up. He didn't ask if he could come in. He didn't try to pull me out of the pain. He simply sat beside me, with that silence of his that said more than any hug. We stayed there for a time I can't measure. And at some point, when my eyes were dry and my soul less tense, he said, "I know you'll try to push me away because of this, but I came anyway." That sentence stuck inside me, because it was true. I would try to push him away. I'd find a way to say I didn't need him, that I was better, that I preferred to be alone. But he knew. He knew that was my default mode, and even so, he stayed. He stayed there, on the floor with me. He stayed while I pieced myself back together in fragments, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as someone who understands that true love doesn't ask to come in. It sits outside and waits for you to unlock the door, in your own time, at your own pace, even when time feels frozen and rhythm no longer exists. He broke. Not in the controlled, silent way I had so many times before. I broke for real, ugly, intense, raw. It was as if all the layers that protected me came loose at once, and what remained was a woman who no longer knew how to fake strength. A problem. At work, a poorly healed memory, a misplaced word. It doesn't matter what the trigger was. The truth is, everything collapsed, and I collapsed with it. I yelled at him. I threw words like stones, the kind that hurt even when said unintentionally. I accused. I said he deserved someone lighter, simpler, more whole. I said he was wasting his time, that I'd never be enough, that none of it made sense. I wanted to push him away for good. I wanted to ensure he wouldn't come back, because a part of me needed that certainty that I was, in fact, impossible to love. It was easier to believe that than to accept that someone could see beauty in what I judged as darkness. After I said all that, the silence grew thick. He looked at me without anger, without pity, just with a serene sadness in his eyes. And then he left. Not in anger, he just got up and walked out. He closed the door, gently, like someone who respects even the sound of goodbye. And there, alone, with my throat burning and my chest empty, I knew that was it. It was the end, the final test. He had endured everything, but even the most patient person gets tired, and I had pushed him hard enough to drive anyone away. The days that followed were a blur, not because I wanted to forget them, but because every second was a confirmation that I had lost him. I replayed every word I said, every gesture I didn't make. His absence weighed like a lack of air, but I couldn't reach out to him, not after everything. It was too late. I convinced myself of that. Until one night, coming home, I found a small white envelope on my door. Inside, a single sheet with a short sentence in his handwriting. "I don't stay because it's easy. I stay because you're worth it." I read it. I repeated it. I cried. For the first time, not from pain, but from astonishment. Because he was still here. Even after everything. Even after I did my best to prove I didn't deserve him. He was here. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I wanted to stay too. The next morning, I held that note for too long. I folded it, unfolded it, pressed it to my chest, left it on the table, picked it up again. It was just a sentence, but it felt like it was written with everything he never said, and everything I needed to hear my whole life. I stay because you're worth it. Those words wounded and healed me at the same time, because I had never ever thought I was worth it. I learned to measure my worth by who left, by who gave up, by who only stayed while it was convenient. And now there was a man who said, with his very silence, that love doesn't measure conditions. It chooses to stay. For the first time in a long time, I felt fear and hope in equal measure. I decided to write back. Not a love note, not a beautiful declaration, just my truth. I said I was tired of fighting what I felt, that I was scared, yes, that I still felt broken, distrustful, uncomfortable with affection, but that I wanted to try. I apologized in every word, not for the harsh words, but for the walls I built and forced him to climb alone. I wrote with a trembling hand, with my heart still guarded, but with the courage of someone who finally understood that love requires surrender, not perfection. I left the note where he usually passed by, and I waited. He showed up late in the afternoon. He walked in slowly as always, and when he saw me, he didn't ask anything. He just smiled, a small, restrained smile, but full of relief. We sat in silence. Me with my knees crossed, him with his hands in his lap. And after a few minutes that felt like years, I said, "If you still want to stay, I won't try to push you away anymore." It was the first time I said that out loud, and just saying it, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Not because the fear was gone, it was still there, but because finally I had stopped running. I didn't know exactly how to love without fear, but I decided little by little to learn to stay. At first it was strange, almost uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit yet, but that I wanted to wear anyway. Being with him was like relearning how to exist as two, and relearning to trust that I could be seen without being judged, or worse, abandoned. I started sharing small parts of myself. First, the memories I thought were insignificant, a childhood full of silences, the notebooks I hid with scribbled poems, the nights when fear kept me awake. Then came the harder parts, the memories that hurt just to name, and he listened, not like someone waiting for their turn to speak, but like someone who knows the weight of every word spoken with hesitation. He never interrupted. He never tried to solve. He just stayed. And then for the first time, he needed me. On an ordinary day, he arrived quieter, with his eyes down, as if carrying something he couldn't put into words. I didn't press. I just held out my hand. He didn't cry, but he took a deep breath, like someone opening something long kept locked away. He spoke of his own failures, his own fears, the losses he still carries in the pocket of his soul. And there, in that moment, everything balanced. It wasn't just him holding me up anymore. I was a shelter too. There was something sacred in that mutual act of embracing, of accepting each other's cracks without trying to patch them, without trying to change, just staying. That's when I understood that true love isn't the absence of pain, but the presence that continues despite it. We started creating rituals that made no noise but said everything. The coffee he left at my door became reciprocated with notes taped to the mirror. Silent walks turned into deep conversations at sunset. And little by little, what had been a relationship marked by resistance became a territory of peace. There were still fears, of course. There were still moments when the old AnnaBeth tried to reappear, to raise walls, to put up defenses. But now I knew, he knew too, that behind every reaction was someone trying not to lose themselves again. And that was enough. Today, looking back, I see that love didn't come with promises. It came with presence, with consistency, with daily choices made in silence. And maybe that's what so many people don't understand, that true love doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't invade. It stays, even when everything says to go, even when the other person offers more thorns than flowers. It stays. And that's what he did for me. He stayed when I didn't know how to reciprocate. He stayed when I said, with words and actions, that I wasn't worthy. He stayed when I crumbled, when I tested his limits, when I hid behind my pain. And because of that, I learned to stay too, to stop running from what scared me, to stop confusing love with a threat. Today, there's no fairy tale ending, no movie scene. There's a gentle, everyday life built with care. There are still notes left, coffees shared, comfortable silences. There's a love that isn't proven with grand gestures, but with small acts of staying. And sometimes, when he walks through the door with that same calm look as always. I remember the woman I was, the one who kept sabotaging herself, who thought she didn't deserve to be touched, let alone loved. And I realize how far I've come, how much I've learned, and how grateful I am because in the end, love won. Not because it was bigger than the fears, but because it didn't give up in the face of them. Love won when he stayed, even when everything in me begged him to leave. It wasn't overnight that I learned to love in peace. I still carry scars. There are still days when the instinct to flee beckons from afar, trying to pull me back to the old version of me. But now, I know how to breathe deeply. I know how to recognize that the woman who so feared being left no longer needs to hide, because someone saw everything, the best and the worst of me, and chose to stay anyway. Not to save me, not to fix me, but to walk with me. And that's when I understood. The love that endures isn't made only of beautiful feelings. It's made of choices, of presence, of courage, of kindness on hard days, and silence on days when words fall short. Today, if someone asked me how everything changed, I wouldn't know how to give a simple answer. But maybe I'd say this. It all started to change the day I realized he didn't want me to be perfect. He just wanted me to let myself be loved, and that I chose to stay too, and I chose.